it's really a great pleasure to be here. It's nice to be back in the autism world again. I spent 7 years I was research faculty at USC, and I'm just so excited to be here. All of my colleagues that you've heard from today are what I consider part of the A-team. I've worked with many of them over the last decade and a half. So it really is a pleasure. So what I want to, first of all, I have to disclose that I'm going to be talking about a lot of different startup companies, and I am serving as a scientific advisor for the ones that are below. Just wanted to disclose that. But I just wanted to start with what we know about autism and autism spectrum disorders. So, and this really is a summary of what you've heard today. We know that early diagnosis is key. We also know that genetics plays a role. Girls, and this is an area that's been of interest to me in research, girls are very underdiagnosed, and actually there's a recent study that just came out to suggest that, in fact, girls are very much underrepresented. There are a lot of medical and psychiatric comorbidities, and as Dr. Lajonchere just discussed, ADHD is probably one of the most prominent or prevalent comorbidities with autism. Interventions do work, and I think you've heard all about them today. And there are many more treatment options and resources available to individuals to support individuals with ASD across the lifespan. When I was at Autism Speaks, we were often criticized that we were just focusing on the toddler and preschool and the little kids. And what you've seen today is that there has been an incredible body of research now, and it continues to evolve for adolescents and young adults with autism. And the topic that I'm here to sort of talk about today is the role that innovative technologies plays in supporting individuals with autism. Really, these technologies are facilitating what we think of as a brand new area. And since I'm now in the world of precision health, we think of this as really patient-powered research. How do we not only empower our families, but also think about how to really integrate the things that they're experiencing and they're doing in the research that we do today. And ultimately, what we're doing is creating more personalized digital options to support individuals across the lifespan. One of the things that I'm often asked is, well, what is digital health? And it depends on who you ask. So some of the definitions that are out there are, well, it's really the convergence of healthcare and the internet. And that's what in 2001, what some people were describing as digital health. This has evolved. Obama, in his State of the Union address, really identified as this is a new era of patient-powered research. Now that we have cell phones and different kinds of technologies, we can be in control of our own healthcare, our own data, and we certainly know of different companies that support that. The Canadians very astutely refer to digital health as the use of information technology, electronic communication tools, services, and processes to deliver healthcare services or to facilitate better health. And this is sort of the working definition that most people operate under. The FDA has really had to focus and pay attention with the advent of apps and technologies and all of the different startups that are all over the place right now. They've expanded the scope of digital health to include things like mHealth or health IT, wearable devices, telehealth, and personalized medicine. But ultimately, the goal is to provide new and innovative ways to monitor our health and well-being and be able to give us greater access to information. So this is just an example. Digital health is in our everyday. And when I talk about digital health to some people, they think, oh, it's just, apps on a cell phone. But the reality is that it's in everything we do, from genomics to telehealth to remote monitoring if you're a cardiology patient. There are all sorts of things that are happening that are whether they're wearables or sensors or trackers, that are really integrated in part of our everyday life. So this is just to take a step back, and I guess I'm sort of dating myself with my friend here. When you think of the evolution of communication technology for the masses, so we can think about the newspaper. In the 1600s, the newspaper was the primary mechanism of communication. And in 1876, the telephone came to be, and that was like revolutionary. And then in the 20s, you had TV, And then there was sort of nothing. Sure, we went from perhaps cordless to wireless and things like that, and that was a huge advancement. Sadly, I don't think my daughter knows what a wired phone looks like. But then in the 90s, we started to get what we call affordable cell phones, because cell phones weren't affordable. In the 80s, you can get a cell phone for $3,000 and you carried it around in like a big old bag, and some of us can remember what that looked like. With the dawn of the internet, and the internet came to be well before 1994, but that's when it really started becoming something that people started to use. Email, things like that. And then instant messaging in the late 90s and social media now in 2004 you can see how rapidly technology has been moving towards this notion of social communication. So when we think about autism, and certainly when I was at Autism Speaks, we were very invested in innovative technologies that could really help to support individuals with autism. When you think of what the benefits of tablets and smartphones are, you can start breaking down and understanding. You're starting to tie the behavioral symptoms that individuals with autism struggle with, and how technology can actually help alleviate or support. So when you think of a cell phone or a tablet, scheduling reminders, that's an automatic thing. So that is just something that's really easy and very simplistic. Time management, that's something that's really huge. For many of us, time management is an issue having nothing to do with autism, but nonetheless, these technologies can really help to support people to support time management. Medication management, time to take a pill, or time to record when you took a pill, or how you feel after you've taken a pill. Task sequencing. And as you've heard today, task sequencing is something it's really at the heart of some of the things that individuals with autism struggle with. And so when you think of technology that can really do that, so think of machines, think of robots. What they do well is repetition and reinforcing repetition. Maps. I'm lost. Aside from the restricted interest with people that become obsessed with maps, I had an individual with autism that I was actually engaged with and supporting, and he would come with a big box of those old maps we used to get at AAA. And he wanted to talk through every single map. So I'm not talking about maps in sort of in that realm. Behavioral cues. Technology is really, there's all sorts of technology now that's starting to, with Google Glass, I'll briefly mention a little later, where how can you help individuals with autism, how can technology serve a role in helping to deconvolute behavioral cues, whether it's trying to understand a facial expression and having some piece of technology help you understand that if a person is looking at you smiling, that in the case of Google Glass perhaps, there's something that can appear on the eyeglass that says smiling. And then the person as individual is then trained to respond to that. Certainly the video cameras and video calls and the micro, all of those things are things that really can help. And I like this here, to Siri with Love. I'm sure that most of you have heard of that New York Times piece where a mother of a child with autism was talking about how Siri had changed her son's life. And her son would sit there and talk to Siri and have back and forth conversation with Siri. Now, one thing that Siri really helped with this child do is enunciate, because Siri won't respond and understand what you're saying. And so it really did help this child understand how to talk to Siri in a meaningful way. Well, meaningful to him. Siri could go back and forth in really interesting ways and really engage the child, or say, that was not nice, or things like that. Now, there are all sorts of things you can do with Siri other than just get annoyed with Siri, because Siri just never works the way you want her to work. But in this case, it was a really touching story of how this little boy became BFFs with Apple's Siri. Now, there are certain apps that support the ASD community that have really been successful and that are and have really supported individuals with autism. And these step-by-step task lists, there are many tracking devices, especially for individuals that wander. This is not just for the autism community, but also for Alzheimer's, so on the neurodegenerative side. And these have really, for children and individuals that wander, it's been amazing. There are a couple of seizure trackers, and one of the things that I was doing in the Silicon Valley was appifying certain things like sleep hygiene protocols, or bedtime routines, or how to help kids communicate, and working with therapists to understand if you were to create an app and a tool that would reside on a mobile phone, how could you interact with it? So this notion that there are seizure trackers that help to record when a seizure happens, how it happens, how long it lasts, taking video of seizures, that's really important. Sleep trackers, there are dozens of them out there. And you can also, some of them work wirelessly with a watch. They can tell you when you fell asleep, when you were up in the middle of the night. And those have been really helpful, since we know that a very large percentage, between 80 and 90% of individuals with autism really suffer from sleep issues, and mostly insomnia. And so it's not that they can't fall asleep, it's that they can't stay asleep. So part of the research I was involved with colleagues at Vanderbilt in Colorado involved how can you create a program that can be delivered on a mobile phone that can help a parent get their kids to sleep. So there are other cognitive challenge games that are out there. Some of them have a stronger evidence base to support their efficacy, but certainly there are apps that support the autism community that are very helpful. Now, I will warn you, and many of you know this because we know this just from things we use in our daily lives, all apps are not created equal. And when I was at Autism Speaks, a colleague of mine really was invested in creating an inventory of apps for autism that parents really liked, and they were able to rank them. And they broke them down into category, platform, age, and then whether there was supporting research. Now, not everything has to have a huge evidence base, but certainly if you're trying to measure outcome, and certainly if you're going to be charging money, it is very important to understand what the research, what's the evidence to support the efficacy of this tool. And so when I went up to the Silicon Valley, I thought I was going up to understand the business side of science, because I was really interested in how people turn science into something that could be technologically really useful. And what I ended up realizing is that, wow, oftentimes they forget that there is supposed to be science. And so that's one of the things that was a little hard for me to embrace as part of my work. But a lot of these things don't have any supporting research. And so there are some things like meal trackers and diet trackers that they don't need that much evidence. If it works, it works. And people will tell you that how many stars they'll give, whether it worked for them. But for our kids, it's really also important. I want to shift gears a little bit to some of the mobile-based technologies, because the technological advances right now are really focused on a mobile phone. And it's really interesting, more millennials, and millennials are described, they're pretty much 18 to 30. That's sort of the millennial age. It's I think the generation Y. And 99% of them own a cell phone, and you could tell they're attached to them. But many more millennials are using the internet to post pictures and videos and share things with family and other people, and they often use these apps to track their kids' activities. According to the Pew Research Center, 95% of Americans own a cell phone, and 77% of them own a smartphone. And as I mentioned, 99% of these millennials have a smartphone. The interesting thing for me, a lot of my research is focused on under-resourced or underprivileged populations, rural as well as ethnically diverse. They don't have access to the internet, and so they use their phones. That is their sole connection to the internet. It's their sole connection to information. From the healthcare perspective, it can also serve as their connection to the healthcare system. So there's evidence that has shown that there are new opportunities to empower patients to really drive more of their decision making. And certainly, if you go to your doctor and you start pulling out things from the internet, they're like, "Oh my God, stop! That's horrible. That's the kiss of death. I really don't want to think about that." But more and more now, you think of companies like 23andMe, where they give you, you can sequence your genome and they'll give you all that information. It still freaks a lot of people out. But nonetheless, we are in an era where we need to be able to sync with patients and help them make more informed decisions. And there is evidence to suggest, and research this, a couple of research studies that are more recent than this, that some of these web-based electronic data capture systems are actually better for treatment adherence and medication monitoring and compliance rates with all sorts of different healthcare issues. And one of the things that people don't think about is that it's really, digital health is transforming the way we help support developing nations. So really, how do you deliver healthcare in places where there is very little, or there's very little expertise? In the case of autism, some of the folks that actually presented today, they spend a lot of their time going to places like Bhutan or Bangladesh or Vietnam, providing training to professionals, providing training to parents because there aren't professionals, so they try to train the parents. Well, I think technology is already having a huge effect. Even texting for them in some of the developing nations has been incredibly helpful. So as I mentioned, startups are really focusing on autism technology. There are lots of different places where this place on the left, Embodied, it's focusing on creating social robots. So following this notion that individuals with autism really relate better to machines or computers or avatars than they do humans, we can start thinking about how we can use technology to help them integrate and transition from having that robot, whether it's a friend, just merely having that as a friend. And so again, conducting evidence-based studies that really help to evaluate the effectiveness of that robot in the home, as well as a therapeutic companion. So oftentimes the therapies that are conducted in a clinic setting, they don't translate because they're not supported in the home. And so you can use technology, whether it's a robot or some other form of technology, to reinforce the things that are learned in the clinic. There are certain companies down here like Achille that are really developing interesting video game-based technology to support cognitive interventions. So they run the gamut of what's going on. So how do you incorporate technology into research? That's something that's very interesting to me. When you think about, we're in this world of big data where collecting a lot of information is actually easy. So when I talk about big data and machine learning and other analytic tools, it can be collecting within a subject, so getting a lot of data from sensors and monitors, or also between subjects. So if I want to know whether a medication might work better for group A than group B, if I collect enough data on a lot of people, all of a sudden you'll start to see patterns in the data. Technology can help us integrate different kinds of data. So for example, for genomic studies or proteomic studies, trying to integrate this biological data with data that you're gathering from interventions and different treatment studies is also huge. It can really help inform and develop technology that can serve to support individuals with autism. Wearables and sensors is an area that's actually it's booming right now, where there's a meltdown tracker that's being developed, where is there an opportunity that if you start looking at the galvanic skin response and different other types of physiologic responses, as you start to sense that a child is melting down or really decompensating, there's a watch that actually turns color so that the people in the room can sense something is going to happen. So if you could start integrating the biologic data with some of the behavioral data and turn that into useful information that can prevent a meltdown, that can anticipate a stroke or anticipate a seizure, that can only help to improve the individual's quality of life. And you can imagine in some of these classroom settings where children who are nonverbal can't tell you how they feel, can't tell you if they're in pain. Those visual cues for whether it's a healthcare provider, an interventionist, or a school teacher can really be instrumental. Clinical trials have been using technology as well for symptom reporting. So if you're participating in a clinical trial, I can send you a push notification to say, how are you feeling right now? As opposed to at the end of the day or 2 days later, asking you retrospectively how you were feeling 2 days ago at 4 o'clock. Well, the only thing I can tell you about 4 o'clock is that I'm either busy or tired. So being able to use that technology and integrating that to monitor whether it's symptom reporting or med management or treatment adherence. Did you do what you were supposed to do? Those kinds of things are companion, where they're called medical devices, they're called companion devices now that the FDA is starting to recognize as being really important. Now, it's all exciting, right? And you have to think about, okay, well, what's the downside of this? So I entered the work that I was doing in the Silicon Valley, very passionate about that. I'm very passionate about technology and really helping to transform healthcare. My entire career, I've been on the basic science side, I've been on the clinical side, where what really gets me excited is taking the basic science and translating that into something that can be clinically meaningful and useful, whether it's an intervention, whether it's a pill, whether it's something else that can actually change someone's quality of life. So when you think about a lot of these companies and app developers, they make claims that aren't evidence-based. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of companies that really got themselves into trouble. So when you're evaluating, well, I get calls all the time, do you want to be an advisor? In fact, I have this group that's constantly like bullying me now about, oh, we want you to be an advisor because there's this Frisbee that we think is going to help kids with autism for whatever reason, right? I don't know if it's turn taking or whatever, right? I mean, I don't know that I can catch a Frisbee. So, but the point is, my bar, especially if it's in the therapeutic realm, is what's the evidence and show me the data. It's also very important to have academic collaborators involved. A lot of academicians, they are like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm afraid, or I don't want to get too involved, or and actually that's a bad thing because the academics have the rigor and they have to really hold the company's feet to the fire to be able to do that. Including consumers or patients in product development or user testing is absolutely critical. I had someone come to me to say that they wanted to develop something for the autism community specifically, but I asked them how on earth this thing like made noise and it went off randomly and it was like unwieldy and it was big, and I thought, have you ever interacted with someone with autism? Because it would never work. In fact, you'd freak them out and they'd decompensate. So including the target audience in the research process is really critical. Shoestring development teams can also compromise. A lot of academics, because they don't have the money, they will try to take on something on themselves. And what I have found is that a lot of companies are more than happy to help partner with academics to be able to develop tools that are actually in their specialty and can actually make a difference. And then wearables and sensors must be calibrated against known standards. And I have here the Fitbit story. Nothing against the Fitbit. I really actually think it's quite cute. But I can, regardless of whether it's a Fitbit or the Apple Watch, which I have here, you have to be very careful. When they did a comparison between or among the Fitbit and other very well calibrated known sensors and watches that measure motion, accelerometers and things like that, what they realized is that the Fitbit just doesn't calibrate. And so the other day, I was, I forget the name of, I am like a cooking moron, but I was taking a lemon and I was shaving it and using the shavings for something. And all of a sudden my watch starts going off, congratulations, you just hit 10,000 steps and you've exceeded your goal. And I was doing this for like a good 10 minutes. And so that is really not a good measure of movement or motion because I was really standing still. I mean, sure, my arm was a little sore, but I wasn't moving. And so The Fitbit story is very relevant here because unless you have known standards that you are calibrating towards, then all of your data could be skewed or misleading or just not real. So there are some evidence-based tools with promise for ASD, and certainly I've been involved with Cognoa, which is using machine learning to screen kids, parents answer questions, upload videos, and the goal of that is to identify kids that might be at risk for a developmental delay or autism as early as possible. And there are a couple of, I was brought on to be able to really develop the evidence, the clinical evidence to support that. NODA is another company that does remote diagnosis of autism using in-home videos, and they've published several papers on that. Can you diagnose, especially for people that live remotely, or they can't afford to go into a clinic, can a clinician using some telemedicine system help be able to diagnose a parent by helping the parent take videos of their kids and get that information? Achille is the company that they're going after a medical device designation from the FDA and collecting data right now. And this is in the area of cognitive therapeutics and assessments and diagnostics. And so what they're doing is that they're developing video game technology so that they can start measuring and using that in cognitive interventions. They've done most of their work in Alzheimer's, and now they're moving into ADHD. They've gotten a lot of funding. I mean, they're up in like $77 million to be able to do this in ADHD and autism. And so they're working, they've got their heads down on that. Reveal. That's a company, it was a startup, young kids from University of British Columbia, and it's a wearable band that helps track anxiety and other physiological signals, so parents, caregivers, and individuals can figure out how to predict a meltdown, and how we can start thinking about, can technology actually help us do that? And then Google Glass, which I mentioned earlier, some of my colleagues up at Stanford are working on this. It's for emotion recognition. And so when they put on the Google Glasses, you have an individual with autism in a social setting. Imagine in terms of Dr. Lageson's work, and someone approaches them and they can't tell if they're happy, sad, they're gonna hurt them, or what they're gonna do. And if there could be some cue that can help them identify what that person is experiencing, then you can train them to help them determine the most appropriate response. Now, the stars indicate that these are reported findings, they're not published, so again, you take that with a little grain of salt. Can virtual reality help? There was a big article right now on virtual reality and what it's doing with PTSD in veterans that have returned from war. Now, virtual reality, what it does is that you get real life experiences, but they're in these safe, controlled environments, and you can interact with different avatars, and you're in that world. And a lot of people are using it to train. In ADHD, it's been used to help train kids to stay on task and stay on track, and it's really cute. But you're creating unique settings where individuals with autism, they can interact in very safe environments without some of the real world social consequences that can evolve. So they can make mistakes without fear of dangerous, real, or humiliating consequences. And there could be a trained therapist there to help them navigate that world. So, and there is evidence, you can see here, there's some published literature to suggest that virtual reality training can improve social cognition. And in one case, there's one paper that helped autistic teens and adults learn to drive. And so without putting them on the road in harm's way, they could actually learn to drive using these virtual reality apps. Now, very briefly, I just want to talk about technology does go sideways. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the TheraNo story, but it's really a very unfortunate one. This was a Stanford dropout. She dropped out in her freshman year, and a lot of people said, oh, she's the new Steve Jobs. And she still wears the black turtleneck and the black clothes, and it was the female version of Steve Jobs. This company claimed that with one tiny drop of blood, so it was going to be a painless way to get blood and to be able to screen in a very low-cost way for all sorts of things. And all of that information was going to be returned to you and on your cell phone. Now, TheraNo's achieved a $9 billion valuation. They had over $700 million of invested capital from some huge firms. And they actually established partnerships with Walgreens, with Safeway, with Blue Cross, I think it was Blue Cross, and the Cleveland Clinic. So they sold a lot of people a bill of goods. And in 2016, and I was hearing about this story for a couple of years, but in 2016, there was a journalist from the Wall Street Journal who really started to get a little curious about the secrecy around this. And what came out was that actually the company's core technology was faulty, that the proprietary technology that they were claiming to have was actually using competitors' equipment. It wasn't even their own. And in the state of Arizona, they had actually were conducting a test with 80 patients that all of the data were faulty, they were wrong. And so you can imagine how this could have really misdiagnosed patients or led them down the garden path. The other one on the behavioral side is Lumosity. I don't know how many of you have played these games, but the FTC slapped them with a no-no, where they were required to pay $2 million because of deceptive advertising for the brain training program. And I actually know a little bit about the folks that are on the science side. But again, I think that these agencies right now, the FDA, the FTC, they're starting to hold people's feet to the fire. And that's exactly what I experienced in the Silicon Valley, where I was working alongside all of these folks who claimed to be doing things that were therapeutic or in the scientific realm or wanting to invest and develop products for individuals with autism, but 90% of what they were saying was false and there was no evidence to support it. So it was really a rude awakening when I sort of kind of 2.5 years later, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just unbelievable to me. Because as you're trying to do, you want to do well by doing good. And that's the bottom line. So I just want to end by saying that there is despite that, there's a lot of good technology that has really improved quality of life for individuals with ASD across the lifespan. There are many opportunities for incorporating technology in research. Academic partnerships with tech companies will yield the greatest benefit. But be skeptical. You have to see the data. And again, technology is changing the way we provide personalized care to patients, and it really has opened up new avenues for us to really revolutionize healthcare in the developing world. Thank you very much.